Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? All right. How about you do one more of those? One more round of that. All right. I don't know about you, but I am really excited to be here today, and I'm finding it hard to believe that it's 10 years since the final flight of the Space Shuttle Atlantis, of the Space Shuttle program. There are tears, I will tell you that. But it's a great day to be here to celebrate that milestone. And, when was it? 1985. I think I have notes today because I'm lame. 1985 was the first flight of Atlantis. And over the following 26 years, Atlantis flew 33 missions. Pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Awe and wonder are two words that come to my mind when I think of spaceflight just in general. But holy moly, how fortunate are we today to have this masterpiece of a spaceship hanging above us. All right, we're also very fortunate today to have 3 of the 4 crew members for that final flight. We've got Commander Chris Ferguson, and 2 mission specialists here. We're missing a pilot, Doug Hurley, but we'll excuse him. We've got mission specialist Sandy Magnus, my partner in crime with all things space station, and my other friend Rex Walheim. And the bonus today is that all of us on this stage with you today have had the opportunity to fly on the Space Shuttle Atlantis. The other 2 amazing people here with us are Bill Shepard down there on the end. Bill's had 4 space flights, Space Shuttle, Soyuz, and the ISS. In fact, he was the commander of Expedition 1 on the International Space Station. And he was a mission specialist on STS-27 in 1988, which was the 3rd flight of the Space Shuttle Atlantis.
Wow.
And to my right here, Norm Thagard. Normie. Norm. Norm's had 5 space flights, Space Shuttle, Soyuz, and the space station Mir. He was a mission specialist on STS-30 in 1989, which was the 4th flight of Atlantis. And then in 1995, returned on the Space Shuttle Atlantis from his 115 days as the first U.S. crew member on the Mir space station. All right, and I'm Nicole Stott, and I am always happy to be back here at KSC. It feels like home to me. This is where I grew up as a NASA engineer with the Space Shuttle program, and I had the chance to get to know up close and personal the Space Shuttle Atlantis and the other space shuttles, to get to know some of the people here today that honestly, and some of them work here, believe that the care and feeding of these spacecraft, of all spacecraft that are put together here, is their responsibility. You could not find a better place to work than here at Kennedy Space Center. And I was blessed to come back to Earth on the STS-129 mission from my space station flight on the Space Shuttle Atlantis. So that's a fine memory of mine. And I am honored to be here today as the moderator of this panel with this awesome group of Earthlings, with this just incredible spaceship above us, and with all of you. So with that, we will get to, I've got a couple questions that I'm gonna ask all of these folks, and then we've got some from the audience that were given to me in advance. So first of all, I'd like to start out, you guys. We can go whichever order you want. I leave that to you. Just by asking everyone to share something about your time as an astronaut that includes a memory of Atlantis. Norm.
Well, I like to tease people when I give presentations that I flew 2 flights on Challenger, 1 on Discovery, and 1.5 on Atlantis. So you can ponder how one flies 1/2 flight on a space shuttle. But I certainly do remember the Atlantis because it was my way home off the Mir space station back in July of, in fact, it's just a little more than 26 years, I think yesterday maybe. And as a native Floridian, I had 4 shuttle flights that all landed out at Edwards, even though my first was supposed to land here. And when we landed out there, we had waved off twice here, and then weather made us land out at Edwards, and our Capcom, when we had wheel stop, said, "I've got good news and bad news. The good news is there's plenty of beer. The bad news is it's 3,000 miles away." But on that last flight off of Mir, we landed here at KSC, and the native Floridian got to land in his native state.
Thank you. Chris?
So, it is, first of all, it is really cool to be under this thing again. I mean, just looking up and knowing that, we were, amongst the few that came out of that hatch the very last time is pretty special. For the last third of the shuttle program was really spent building the International Space Station. So I flew on Atlantis twice, but I will never forget my first opportunity to look up at the space station when we were about 600 feet away, and you get ready to dock, and you are in this thing that's the size of a commercial airplane. It's huge. It's magnificent. Sometimes you have to pinch yourself and to believe that you really are here in space. And you look up at the International Space Station that is sort of poised above you, and it's so big. It doesn't. The windows aren't big enough to contain it, right? You have to move your head all around to see the whole thing. And then you just think to yourself, wow, I'm here. I'm in this really cool spaceship. I'm going 5 miles per second. I am underneath the International Space Station that was built by the spacefaring nations of the world. 15, 16 different nations that came together to do it. And I get to command my very own spaceship, and I get to see this. I wish that I could have the opportunity to vicariously take every tax-paying American and human that's interested in spaceflight for that just one moment to be able to look up and see what it's like to really fly in space. That's my fond memory.
Is there anybody here that would want to go on that ride? That experience? Highly recommend it. Sandra?
Yeah, I also highly recommend it. It's really special. On a more personal note, Atlantis was my first mission, and it was my last mission. And so the vehicle has, I have a strong resonance with the vehicle. And I remember when we landed on that last mission, Fergie and Doug and Rex and I kind of looked at each other on the flight deck, and nobody wanted to move because we were the last ones to ever be in the vehicle. And sitting there, we finally had to move, and you crawl out of your seat and crawl down the ladder and get out of your orange suit and walk around the bottom of it after getting out of the changing room, and just looking at it and just realizing, wow, this is the last time this magnificent vehicle is going to fly, and it's certainly time to move on and do other things as a country, but really appreciate the engineering that went into this, the dedication of thousands of people over decades to make it look easy when it's so complicated, and then realize that we can accomplish anything that we really want to when we put our minds to it, because the shuttle will always be the most technologically advanced vehicle that we fly because of the nature of the missions that it did. So it's a very special vehicle, and I'm really excited that you're here today to share in some of that history.
Thanks, Sandy, because I think what you just said speaks to, and Chris, you're working it every day here, all of us in some way have some little play in the things that are going on in the space exploration world, but it just reminds me of what I learned here at KSC, which is that, first of all, you go into every challenge like with the belief that there is a solution to the problem. That's just the way you go into it. And that the motto of all of this is, here's how we can, not why we can't. I mean, we really approach things in that way to be able to do stuff like this. All right, Rex.
Well, this being under here does bring back tremendous memories, like doing a spacewalk and crawling down the rail there and seeing the coast of Florida off the tail of the space shuttle. I was a frequent flyer on Atlantis. I flew 3 times, and Atlantis has a little quirk that I knew about as I learned quickly on my first flight, and I kept forgetting to remind my crew members about. And that's when you come home, you've been floating in space for, for a week or two, and you do your deorbit burn, and you start coming back into the atmosphere. It starts shaking, and you get turbulence. And on my first flight, I was down in the lower deck. There's two decks, the lower deck and the upper deck. I was down the lower deck, and as we get into these vibrations, and the pilot is very conscientiously trying to fly the vehicle, the bathroom door swings open and slams against the ladder, and it makes this huge bang. And so my first flight, we look back and go, hey, it's the bathroom door. And so I kept thinking, I had to warn people about this. So on the second flight, I'm up on the upper deck, and the same thing happens. We're coming in the atmosphere, whack, there's a big bang, and it's just the bathroom door. And again, I fly the third time, and unfortunately, I didn't tell Fergie and Doug there's going to be a huge bang when you're trying to fly this airplane. And sure enough, it swung up. No, don't worry. It's just the bathroom door.
That's a potty story that I have not.
I remember that before. Sorry, I didn't warn you guys.
All right, Bill.
My first flight in December of 1988 on STS-27, crew of 5. I was one of the 2 rookies on the crew. We had what was called a high inclination launch, where you take off from the pad, you make a big turn up the East Coast, and we went to 57 degrees north and south latitude. And that was a function of the payload that we had. Our mission was to support the Department of Defense. What we did is still to this day kind of a secret. Nobody's ever talked about it, and nobody probably ever will, which is great. But after that first day was over and most of our payload work was done, I found myself up early in the morning of the second day. And if you look up, you can see how the shuttle flies, and the picture up behind the shuttle is kind of where the Earth is. So you're really flying with the belly to space, and the top of the orbiter is looking down at the Earth. So I was floating over the windows in the aft cockpit, looking down at the Earth, trying to figure out where we were. And we had just come out of darkness, and we're starting to be in sunlight. And I was pretty sure we were over some part of central or western Russia, the Soviet Union at that time. And so I looked outside, and I anywhere I looked for 1,000 kilometers, it was just white. And I'm going, whoa, wait a minute. There must be a road or a railroad track or a contrail or a smokestack. And the more I looked, the harder it was to figure out exactly where I was and what I was looking at, because it was just this featureless expanse. There was no indication that humans were down there. And then I thought to myself, I started feeling really weird. I'm thinking, maybe something happened last night when we went into orbit, and I'm not really looking at the Earth anymore. I'm looking at some, foreign planet somewhere else. And that feeling just kind of came over me, and of course it wasn't true, but I still think that today. I'm waiting for the day when maybe somebody here has that sensation. That's what I felt on my first flight.
That leads really nicely, I think, into the next question, because hopefully somebody here will have that opportunity to look out the window and to be looking at another planet through that window, to know it's another planet. So, Bill, let's start with you and come back this way. So how do you think that the Space Shuttle program has put us in a place to continue to explore low Earth orbit, but also to take us back to the moon and on to Mars? All the work that's going on right here at Kennedy Space Center.
You want the good or the bad?
I want you to tell us whatever you want.
Maybe a little bit of both then. So the good part is, ever since the 1950s, we've had a design in mind to build a stepping stone out in orbit. That's the space station today. There have been a series of stations in space. The US had Skylab, the Russians flew several versions of what they call a Mir. We have ISS in orbit right now. I don't think you can build a platform like that efficiently without basically a cargo truck like you've got with the space shuttles. And But what does that mean in terms of exploration? I think the things that we're going to need to go to Mars, it's going to be a long trip. I'm pretty sure the vehicles are going to have to be really big. Probably about the size of what we have right now on Space Station. They're going to have to be built by some kind of vehicle that can take big pieces up, can support robotic activity, handle astronauts outside doing spacewalks, and you're looking at it right there. It's going to take the efforts of many nations to bring it all together. And I think over the past 2 decades with this shuttles building the space station, that's the lesson that we've learned. This is a blueprint for how we're going to do things like going to Mars.
Rex?
Yeah, I agree with Shep. This was the vehicle that allowed us to build the space station. This was the heavy lifter that could bring those pieces up to build the space station, which is where we learned to live and work in the long duration up in space. And we have to learn how to do that. We have to learn how to take care of the human body for long periods of time. We need to have systems that work for long periods of time. And we need to know how to do all that before we can go to Mars. And we're learning that day after day after day at the International Space Station. And we're also learning how to work together as a team. Like Shep was saying, this incredible international team. We had European astronauts, Russian cosmonauts, American astronauts. We all worked together up in the space station, one team. We worked together, solved problems together. And that's what it's going to take to go to Mars someday.
So, if you look at the history of the space program, we started with Gemini, Mercury, Apollo, and then came the space shuttle. What did the space shuttle do? It expanded the number of people that could go into space. It expanded the types of people that could go into space. No longer did you have to be a military person. I am a civilian. I came through the civilian ranks along with many of my colleagues. It expanded the types of missions that we could do. When we first built the space shuttle, we had no idea that there was going to be a space station. That was part of the plan, as Shep alluded to. So you look at what we've accomplished in the 3 decades since the space shuttle has been operating, it's expanded the knowledge of how to operate in space. It expanded the numbers of people who had an opportunity, not just as astronauts, but as engineers and mission planners, even just the acquisition and all the support functions. And so that created the foundation for what you see happening today in space, where all of that corporate knowledge has been diffused, not just in the United States, but across the world, to the extent that we're at another sort of jump in the curve, if you will, where you've got commercial entities and private entities engaging in this area, building off of all that work we did in the government, in the Space Shuttle program. And that's going to expand, again, the numbers of people that can go into space, the types of people that can go into space, the types of things that we're going to do in space, not just in lower orbit, but beyond. So the shuttle was a huge, important building block on that ever-widening expansion of the horizons that we have as a species as we continue this wonderful adventure in space.
So, the analogy I like to use is that low Earth orbit will become a stepping off point. And let me elaborate a little bit. In order to support exploration, right, you need a lot of infrastructure. You need a lot of rockets that can lift a lot of stuff. You've got food to bring, you've got spare parts, you've got supplies, you've got your lander, wherever that might be. And low Earth orbit will be the staging area for that. And what you see right now is you see commercial companies, right, not NASA, but commercial companies stepping up to provide what I'll call cargo service to low Earth orbit, where, like Shep said earlier, we will assemble whatever it takes to get us, to Mars and beyond. So the analogy is, if you look at Everest, right? What did it take to get to the top of Everest? It took the brains. It took help, right, in the form of Sherpas, and it took a lot of base camps along the way. So if you look at the analogy there is low Earth orbit is base camp. Mars is the pinnacle of Everest, and these Sherpas that will haul and support these major endeavors are commercial companies to allow NASA to perform its exploration mission, wherever they want to go. So there's a lot of analogies, and I think it's interesting because it brings in the whole heavy lift commercial business It brings in commercial space flight. It brings in human space flight to get the astronauts there so they can do the exploration. And it sort of supports an entire, I'll call it, space life cycle, if you will. And then behind that will come opportunities for commercial passengers to spend extended periods of time in low Earth orbit, whether they're doing research or whether they're vacationing. So, 10 years ago when we looked at all this and said, what would it look like 10 years from now? I think most of it would say, it might look like it does today. So if I had to look out 10 or 20 years of what it's going to be like, I think you're going to see people spending nights in space that they paid to spend time there for. And that somebody could be you, all you young men and women out there who aspire to these kind of things. All you have to do is live long enough to make millions and millions of dollars. And you too can go to space. But if you look at like early plane tickets, they were very expensive. And now, it's pretty inexpensive to fly around. So there's a little bit of economy of scale that comes in there too.
And crushing the dream there, Chris. Okay.
I think that I can only add that look at that vehicle up there from what you've already heard about needing weight carrying capability. That vehicle could carry 64,000 pounds to orbit and bring back 32,000 pounds. An amazing amount, and you need that sort of thing, as you've heard, to build the sort of infrastructure you need to then go to Mars. You heard about the need for the capability of taking a lot of folks. When the shuttle came up to bring me off the Mir space station, it had 7 people on board. But when it left to come back here to Kennedy Space Center, it had 8 people on board because myself and my 2 Russian crewmates came back with it. I guess there were a lot of folks in the press who looked at 7 boarding and 8 getting off and wondered if we were multiplying up there. But this vehicle right there provided the very sort of thing that you need, so we need something like this for the future.
Thanks, you guys. All right, so we all on this stage are retired from NASA at this point. I would argue that what every single one of us are doing in one way or another is carrying on that belief, that passion, that love for space exploration, that in one way or another is related to the idea that everything we're doing off the Earth is about improving life here on Earth. So I would just ask, because like me, I cannot get the space thing out of anything I'm doing. In some way or another, it's influencing whether I'm creating art, or I'm consulting for somebody, or I'm doing a speaking event. It comes into the conversation, or it has an influence. So just really quickly, if you could each just tell us what you're doing now, and if, like me, this space thing is right there in the middle of it somehow.
What I'm doing now is taking my grandchildren on a lot of trips.
Yes.
When I left, well, first of all, my dad always said that when I learned I could do something, I lost interest and went on to something else. Maybe that's why I got 2 electrical engineering degrees, was a Marine Corps fighter pilot, got a Doctor of Medicine degree, and then became an astronaut because I got tired of all the other things.
Norm's a slacker.
But retirement's great, but I still am engaged. I was able, when I came out of the astronaut program, to go back to Florida State as a professor of electrical engineering. My dean said, what do you want to do? I want to get people in our college, and I mentioned something called Challenger Centers, which is a mission control station and also a space station simulator. So we raised money and we did that, and we have probably gotten a lot of kids to turn on to math, engineering, and technology and science. So we're getting a lot of students in our engineering college as a result of that center.
Christopher.
I work for the Boeing Company, and my office is about 5 miles away from here in one of the old orbiter processing buildings, and we are getting ready to launch a second Starliner, which is one of the passenger vehicles that will take astronauts back and forth to the space station later this month.
Yay.
I left the astronaut office about a year after STS-135 had landed, and I went to lead a professional society for the aerospace field with all the engineers and scientists and technical people, and did a lot of advocacy for the industry in Washington, helping the political leadership and the non-technical leadership understand the technical parts of the industry and help, guide policy and hope that we can, improve that and help those two communities understand each other a lot better, as well as working with the engineering community to curate some of the knowledge that's going on in the field and making sure that we're spreading that around. So a lot of communication really about aerospace. I spent a little bit of time in the Pentagon doing some engineering work there. Now I'm a professor of the practice at Georgia Institute of Technology part-time, working with students. I love working with students. I got to do a lot of that when I was at AIAA as well. Some consulting, some technical advice, things like that. Still very much engaged in the aerospace industry.
I retired from NASA about a year ago, and I work now for a company called Axiom Space. And Axiom Space is building the first commercial space station. So we're going to launch modules, and we're actually going to attach them to the International Space Station, which is up there right now. Continue to build them, and then when it's time to end the space station program, the International Space Station, we will detach, and we become a free-flying space station. And so then we'll help this transition from the government to the commercial aspect. And as a process of that, we're flying what are called private astronaut missions to the International Space Station starting in about January of next year. This kind of helps us learn from this process of having civilians on board the space station. And so we're trying to make space more accessible for everyone, make it cheaper, and make it more people have a chance to go into space.
I'm living in Virginia, but I'm working with undergraduate college students across the nation, mentoring them on various projects. And I'm basically trying to teach engineers how to make stuff with their hands. And this is for you kids out here. I'm finding more and more people in these technical disciplines who have never done anything hands-on. And this is a real problem, because when you're in space, or you're on the moon, or you're going to go to Mars, you're not going to have everything that you need. And there may be something that you really want or you got to have, and the only way you're going to get it is if you can make it. If you haven't learned how to do this in school, it's going to be a bad mission. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Thank you, guys. Love it. And I love that there's opportunities like this for us all to see each other every now and then too. That's really nice.
Come back again.
Yeah. All right, so I have some questions that were given to me that were through the audience in advance. Let's see. Here's one. All right, we heard about a potty door, a bathroom door, and we heard about a mission and a half. Anybody else have any funny stories from STS-135 that you found hilarious? I guess that's you two. We got to point at you two.
I have funny stories, but I don't want to rat on these guys. So I'm going to tell you about a funny story about another mission and another person. And actually, Sandy, you were there.
We flew twice together, actually.
So everybody up here knows a gentleman named Don Pettit. He's a famous astronaut. He epitomizes what Bill had mentioned with the ability to work with his hands and be creative and solve problems without the ability to go to Home Depot to pick up the tools that you need, right? He's incredibly creative and can fix things with what he has in front of him. Well, he was an amateur, well, not an amateur, but he loved space experimentation. At any opportunity, he would do something interesting. So he had always been worried about, for long-duration spaceflight, you slough off skin all the time. And that's just the way we are. We're humans. We shed. And he, I think, wanted to create a little bit of an example of how, in an extreme case, what human skin shedding could look like. So he chose to wear a pair of socks for about, I don't know, 3-4 days, which was not unusual. And then he set up a felt background and a backlight so he could film himself take the socks off. So he peels these socks off his feet, and it looks like somebody took a 12-year-old blanket that had been over a piece of furniture and it's just this cloud of dust that we, was invariably we knew what it was. And everybody watching this just held their breath for about a minute and a half. But in reality, all these simple things we take for granted here on Earth, that, water flushes down the toilet, the dust falls to the ground. These are just the simple little things that we deal with day in and day out, and that was a story that I unfortunately witnessed firsthand.
Okay, all right, so I have a note. Don is the source of so many stories because he's so brilliant. He's really a national asset when you put him on orbit because he's so creative and he's so intelligent and he's so good at explaining what he's doing. So I wander into the MPLM, which is a cargo vehicle we had attached, just like on STS-135 where we transfer a lot of cargo out. And I wandered in there one afternoon, and you guys have all seen water on orbit. It's these big bubbles, right? So he was taking some candy corn and he was putting it into the sphere. And what he was doing was an experiment on crystallization, because you put one piece of candy corn in the water sphere, it's just kind of floating around, float another one, floating around, At some point, you get enough candy corn in the sphere, it forms a specific geometrical lattice so that it can all fit. So he was trying to find that point when, to watch the crystallization or watch the formation of when it locks into place in that maximum packing factor so that all the candy corn fits. And so he did. It was really awesome to watch. And then he started eating the candy corn. I'm like, Don, what are you doing? It's like, well, I don't know how to clean up after this. We had to do something with candy corn. You want some? It's like, yeah, I like candy corn. I'll eat some.
Yeah, I think what we call Don was like the MacGyver of space, but I think Don has to thank Bill for some very tools on the space station that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So,
one other quick shuttle story. So, another early morning, I was up looking out over the payload bay. Nobody else was up, and you have a handhold that you can kind of maneuver yourself around and look kind of out the window. And I had my hand on the handhold, and I thought for a second, I said, well, what if I push on this handhold? What'll happen? And I'm looking out in the payload bay and I'm pushing and nothing's happening. So I push a little differently, and I get just at the spot where I can see the tail of the orbiter start to do this. I'm pumping this handle up and down, and the tail's going back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. I didn't tell anybody. So we got back, and part of your post-flight debriefing and all that, you sit and you have questions from all the people in mission control and all the engineers. And you got to realize this vehicle has thousands of sensors in it all over the place. And somehow these engineers saw this motion in the back of the orbiter, and they didn't understand what was going on. And they said, flight day 4 at 23:53 elapsed time, we saw this sensor was going crazy, doing some vibration. Do you guys in the crew know anything about what was going on? I said, no.
fully transparent. That was fun too. That reminds me of doing the burns, and where you could be, even on station, you could be floating in one place and it's like the whole vehicle moved around you. You were just floating.
That's what happened, yeah.
That is what happens.
Things fly off the wall, you're like, whoa, what just happened?
So, all right. So Norm, you flew on Mir. I think that was a very different experience to what all of the rest of us had. Any intel, insight, stories from the Russian Mir space station that the audience should hear today?
Well,
ones maybe they shouldn't, that you're willing to.
Well, probably what they shouldn't hear is that we launched with a case of Russian cognac up to the space station. And every Friday evening at the end of the work week, my flight engineer would come in and in English would say, "It is time to have a drink." But not to worry, because what you would do, as long as you don't shake the bottle, We each had a straw. We would stick it in a bubble and take a sip, and we'd take 2 or 3 sips. The Russian commander would say, "Hvatit," meaning that's it, and we would stop. So this notion that people go up there and drink and get drunk is wholly untrue, because there's no way we're going to do that, knowing that in an emergency we might have to beat a hasty retreat.
I think we all have that understanding in mind, yes. All right, so from the list. All right, we heard about the bathroom door. Anything else that makes Atlantis different from the other space shuttles? Bill?
I think Atlantis was the next to last orbiter that was built, and because of the knowledge that we had for the earlier vehicles on how they performed, some of the pieces of Atlantis could be made lighter. So Atlantis really had the highest performance of any of the shuttles. So it was chosen for a bunch of missions because of that.
So I flew in Atlantis twice. The first time that we flew, we have, there are a few bad alarms when they go off in a space shuttle that you really pay attention to. And, one of them is fire, right? Fortunately, we've never had that. One is what's called DPDT. It means a change in pressure in time. It means you're leaking. And that's when your spacecraft is leaking, that's a huge deal. So the first time I flew in Atlantis, at the moment the main engines shut off, and some of you, if you've seen the videos, your 3Gs, sort of pushing, accelerating you, and then when the engines shut off, everything just seems to fly forward. And then that's the moment you're at 0G. Well, at precisely that moment on my first flight, our cabin pressure alarm went off. And what it really was, it was an overly sensitive cabin pressure alarm, and it actually sensed all the air that had been pushed to the back of the cabin being flung forward when the engines shut off, and it said, wow, here's a change in pressure, I must be leaking. So that happened on my first flight. On our second flight, same vehicle, on the way uphill, somewhere in the middle, we get this cabin pressure alarm. And I thought, I've been here before, I've seen this, I know what's going on here.
And why didn't you tell us in advance?
Because you didn't tell them about the bathroom
Question
door.
about the toilet door.
Rex and I were watching Rex was looking at the gauges and I was looking at the CRT, and we're watching this going, do you want to say anything? We got to say something. I want to say.
Yeah, I think you said, how big is it? And we were like, big!
But, I think the truth is these amazing vehicles each had their little idiosyncrasies and their little warts, and they were really built the same, but they were all a little different. They were all sort of custom built. It's like a custom built car, and no two custom built cars are the same. The orbiters were the same way.
Nicole, I just remembered, I've got a quasi-toilet story about Atlantis.
Those always should be told, I think, yeah.
So one of the mornings we got up on our flight on STS-27, and I was floating around the mid-deck, and you don't wear shoes up there. People just normally wear athletic socks. And I put my foot down on one of the aluminum panels on the mid-deck, and I sensed that my sock was wet. So I reached down and touched it, and it was water. And I'm going, what is going on here? And so there's a couple little doors you can open up, and I looked inside, and sure enough, there was some little globs of water underneath the deck. And I said, this is not very good. So we have a procedure where we take the ladder off between the flight deck and the mid deck, and we pull some panels up so we can get down and see what's going on. And it was really pretty bad because we had a glob of water about the size of a school lunch tray, about that thick, just kind of wobbling over the top of the computers and all the electronics. And you don't want water in your black boxes. So I told Hood Gibson, our commander, he said, hey, go to general quarters, get that water out of there. So I was running to do this procedure that nobody had ever worked before, where you take some parts out of the toilet and you hook hoses up, and you use the pressure in the cabin to blow whatever is on the other end of that hose outside what would normally be a dump for the urine from the toilet, it would suck the water up from the cabin underneath the floor and shoot it outside. That's what I was trying to do. So I get this thing all hooked up, and I talked to Guy Gardner, our pilot. I said, Guy, hit it. And so what happened is somehow I hooked it up backwards. And it started spraying green liquid inside the cabin. So stop. We fixed that. But that was one of the, you know, you just have to take life in space with a smile, because that stuff just happens.
You were that guy. So for 20 years after that, everybody in training said, hey, whatever you do, don't do what that guy did.
Yeah, they never identified the guy.
Classified mission, what can I say?
And we know you don't like to have to kill people anymore after. All right. Okay, so just in terms of questions, I would really love just to hear from each of you, like, just closing thought on where you've been, what you've done, the space, going forward, whatever you think the big picture closing thought is.
For me, I'd just like to say what a pleasure it is to be here with my crewmates from STS-135 and my space shuttle right above me. It's just such a great way to spend the 10th anniversary of that flight. And I remember distinctly sitting on the flight deck up there when at the end of the day, you know, the days are very, very busy. And just sticking, the windows on the top of the shuttle are facing the Earth, so you just press your nose there, and you kind of steady yourself, and then you let go, and you just watch the Earth go underneath you, and it looks like you're flying. And it's such an incredible view from up there. It's just something I wish we could share with everybody, and hopefully we can someday make it much more accessible.
And to that point, if I may, when the first pictures were taken of the Earth from the moon, it spawned the environmental movement. And so I'm so excited about the possibility of more and more people getting the view that we were very fortunate to get. Because to Rex's point, it's an amazing view, and it changes your perspective about the planet. You view the planet as one entity, as our spaceship, and it's something you learn not to take it for granted, and it's something that just changes your whole relationship with it. And the more people who can have that experience and internalize that, I think it will really change the way we approach our relationships with each other around the world and our relationships with the globe. And the more and more people get into space, that will happen, and I'm looking forward to that.
Just to go back on a point Sandy had made earlier, that night before we returned, and you know, we were pretty sure the weather was great the next day. We were pretty sure this was our last night. And I do remember that so very well. We had been, you know, go for, you know, almost 2 weeks. And this was our first chance to just sort of turn the lights down, look out the window. And I still remember, I mean, this has been my third trip, but it's just nothing I had ever gotten used to. You know, looking at the Earth from space is like, it's like looking at a campfire. You just can't take your eyes off it. There's always things changing. You realize how beautiful it is, how fragile it appears. And there's just so few people, I think, that have had the opportunity to see that if we had, you know, if we had the opportunity to share it a little bit, I think everybody might treat the planet just with a little more kindness. And that, I think, is a part of what, you know, taking more people to space is really all about.
I'm reminded that we went in less than a century from horse and buggy to things like that. And the development of the space age, the building of things like the space shuttle have been a huge spur to technology in ways that a lot of you probably wouldn't appreciate that do have industrial application, even such things as aluminum welding techniques. I once read that you don't solve today's problems with today's technology. The space program is going to help us solve tomorrow's problems.
One more story I'll leave with. My last flight was over in March of 2001, landed here on Discovery. You get out of the vehicle, you pile into the Astrovan, you go back to the crew quarters, and we were in space for almost 5 months, and people have somewhat different reactions to being back in gravity, but my experience was really good, and it was in part because we've gotten a lot smarter about how to exercise in space on the space station. We have a lot of equipment that we wouldn't have had before. So the morning of the second day, we're going to pile in a van at the crew quarters, and we're going to go somewhere else for some medical testing. And when you walk around after a flight like that for a couple of days, you've got a couple of wingmen right with you. It's just so if you start going wobbly, they'll grab you, because that sometimes happens. And I was feeling really good, so we're out in the parking lot, we're getting into the van, and my flight doctor was going to drive us, and I said, hey, Terry, let me see if I can drive the van. And it's like a Sunday morning, 6 a.m., and he's looking around to see if the cops were around, if anybody's watching. Parking lot was empty. And so I got in the van, and I was driving around, and I was doing really good. I didn't like to brake really hard, but I could maneuver and manage it. And I did that for about 2 minutes, and I stopped the van, got out, Terry got in. And as I was getting in the van on the other side, I said, you know, if we take a mission, we're going to be going to Mars for 9 months. We're going to be weightless. We're going to deorbit. We're going to land on the surface, and then we're going to have to walk around and drive vehicles and be productive. And I said to myself, we can do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. You know, I think, you know, some of the common themes today here are that we can do really challenging things when we put our minds to it, when we take advantage of the different expertise that's around us, when we work, I think, to what KSC, Kennedy Space Center, has exemplified this idea of here's how we can, not why we can't. I mean, it's amazing what we can do. This is just one example of those things. I'm very happy that we're here to celebrate it. I'd like to leave you with like a thought from that view out the window, and I think it was said in one way or another by every single one of these people, and it's that, you know, in all the complexity of this, going to space, you know, getting off the planet, living and working there, even for a short period of time, and then safely coming home, it comes down to the people, really. And there are 3 very simple lessons that I learned in that time in space. Shouldn't have to go to space to learn them. I'm slow. I think everyone in this room probably knows them, but we live on a planet. I mean, how cool is that to think about the fact that we live on a planet? We are all Earthlings, and the only border that matters is that thin blue line of atmosphere that blankets and protects us all. And so I ask all of you to leave here today as crewmates and not passengers, and to consider that perspective from space that you get through the windows of a vehicle like the Space Shuttle Atlantis, but to also know that you can stand here with your feet firmly on the ground and look up and appreciate those same things. So thanks for being here with us today. Yay Atlantis. Yay to these people. And I think we get to take some pictures. I think that was next on the agenda.